Just because I say something, who promises me I'll be able to bring it to fruition? Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do that.
Welcome to Prism of Torah with Rebbe Asaf Aaron Prisman, engaging Divrei Torah, packed with stories and practical insights. Find us wherever you get your podcasts or at prismoftorah.org.
Shalom Avraham. I would like to share with you a concept that the Heilige Reb Yerucham Zatzal, the Mashgiach of Mir, said in one sentence. And I saw this in his Shtikol Torah in last week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera, but it has a lot to do with our Parsha, Parshas Chayei. In last week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera, we know that Avraham goes out of his way to do his best to ensure he has guests, and despite the fact that he's so eager to do the Heilige Mitzvah of Achnasas Orchim, you see that when he runs to the angels, who appear to be like Ishmaelim, he comes and offers them all kinds of things, but he doesn't say a lot. He says a very little. He says, please take a loaf of bread. I'll bring you a loaf of bread. But what he actually does, he goes all out. Even though he just offered a bit of bread, but he actually ends up providing an extravagant feast, including delicacies like the tongues of the cow, etc., etc. In contrast, in our Parsha, Parshas Chayei, when Avraham is seeking to purchase a burial place for Sarah in the cave of Ma'arat HaMachpelah, at the beginning, Ephron presents himself as, I'm such a Baal Chesed. Initially, he said, I'll give you everything as a present. I'll even give you the field, not only the cave, Ma'arat HaMachpelah, but the field with which this cave is in there, I'll give that to you also. But quickly, he switches from that, and eventually, not only does he ask for a very large amount of money, but as well, he insists the payment is in the best currency at that time. Based on these two contrasts, the Gemara in Bava Metzia Daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph says, from here we see that tzaddikim, they say a little, omrim me'at ve'osim harbe, as opposed to the wicked, the reshaim, they say a lot, and even a little bit they don't do. Omrim harbe ve'afilu me'at lo osim. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that also tells us a similar idea how important it is to say a little but do a lot. And the question I want to raise is, it seems to be very intrinsic that the definition or what reveals to us who is a righteous person and who is a wicked person is very directly related to if you speak a lot or speak a little. And really, misvara, logically speaking, shouldn't the definition just be that tzaddikim are go-getters and they go and do mitzvahs and they go help you out, ben adam l'chaveru, as opposed to rishaim, they don't do a lot? Does that not suffice to be the definition or to reveal to us who's a tzaddik and who's a rasha? It screams out that there is something intrinsic to the definition of what a tzaddik and rasha is based on the amount they speak. So I looked into this and I saw a simple answer, which is probably what many of us would have thought, and that is Rabbeinu Yoina and Machzor Vitri say, we're talking about when you help out your fellow Jew. To make it easier for him to accept your help, you belittle it and you say, it's not a lot, it's so easy for me, it's just a loaf of bread. But really, it might be very difficult for you, but you don't want him to feel that, and therefore it'll be easier for him to accept your help. And that is what a tzaddik does. He doesn't want to make you feel that you're Mashiach, that he's Mashiach you. And then it's a way better type of giving. We know the Chazal also tell us a similar idea, that one of the more elite way of giving tzedakah to people is without them knowing where it came from. That's also easier for them to accept it because they don't know who they got it from. But I want to share with you, in one sentence, what Reb Yerucham says, and I want to build on that sentence. And I think that sentence is such a deep concept that we can all learn from. The concept is that we all, our default setting as people that have a neshamah that's b'tzelem Elokim, we have this natural tendency, unless we messed it up or our environment messed it up, we have this natural tendency of wanting to do good. Why? Because our neshama is chelek Elokim imal, and we want to mimic HaKadosh Baruch Hu's midot. And just like Hashem is rachum and chanun, we also have this urge to be rachum v'chanun. The danger is that thirst of doing good and helping others and doing mitzvahs, especially when it comes to ben adam l'chavero, to our fellow Jew, that urge can be satiated by speaking out what we're going to do. And we don't feel that engine, that motivation anymore, that thirst to actually bring into fruition and into actuality and perform those acts of kindness or wherever it is. And hence, it is precisely the reason that Rishaim speak a lot and say, I'm going to help you with this, and I'm also going to set you up over here. That is what satiates their goodwill, and hence they don't bring it into fruition and they don't actually bring it into actuality. As opposed to tzaddikim, they acknowledge that and they say, I'm not going to say anything. As it is, Just because I say something, who promises me I'll be able to bring it to fruition? Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do that. His amira, his statement is already doing the ma'aseh, just like we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Ma'aseh bereshis be'amira. Vayi or, poof, there was or, etc. But we're not like that. And tzaddikim come to that acknowledgement, and they said, we're not going to say anything. Perhaps that's a yetzer hara that's going to satiate our natural inclination to want to do good. And we're going to feel, oh, we did good by telling the bar mitzvah bachur we're going to buy him a present, even though we didn't actually buy him a present, because that satiated that will to do good. And that is a very dangerous yetzer hara. And yes, that's precisely the definition of what reveals to us who's a tzaddik and who's a rasha. The tzaddik don't say a lot because they realize this. Reb Yerucham brings down that the Chafetz Chaim, anytime someone asked him for something, he wouldn't speak about how to help him. He straight away went out and did whatever needed to be done to help them, perhaps for the same reason. I remember I said this idea to a good friend many years ago, and he explained to me there is such a term known as moral licensing, and perhaps it's the same idea. He told me an example of this idea of moral licensing. A person decides, I need to lose weight, it's a healthy way of life, I need to go on a treadmill every day. And he knows it's important. After he does that, suddenly he gives himself the green light. Now I can eat a lot of chocolate cake because I know I burnt X amount of calories, I have the right now to eat cake. In a sense, it's a bit similar to what we're saying over here. It gives you the moral licensing by you talking, not to actually bring into fruition and do the act of kindness to help out your friend. Because you already felt you did something for him. I'd like to end with this true story that I was amazed by it when I saw it for the first time. And the story goes as follows. Several years ago, there's a small cheder, a school in Eretz Yisrael, where pretty much the average kid was the same as any average kid. But there was one unique fellow over there, a bachur called Shmulik. Shmulik was the kind of child everyone knew he wasn't going to let them down. They all turned to him when they needed something. And it doesn't matter who it was. Teachers realized this, friends. Everyone knew he was reliable and he would help no matter what you asked him for. He was the one the Rebbe would fetch to go get the principal, to go bring extra paper if they required. And the slogan, Shmuel, could you please, became the most popular statement. Of course, to some other kids, they looked at him, not like a big Baal Chesed, but just a pushover. He does whatever you say, all the little chores just throw on him. But Shmulik, for him, that didn't matter. He was proud of all his Maaseh Chesed, big and small. He always carried a little notebook in his pocket. A small, unassuming, old-fashioned notebook where he kept track. And I don't mean a computer, I mean those little notebooks that once people used to write their notes from time to time. And he used to track it for each and every act of kindness they did. One day, out of the blue, a gvir, a wealthy man from New York, came to visit the cheder and came to the class. He introduced himself, explaining that he had come to inspire them to do more acts of chesed and the importance of chesed. And the chesed is one of the pillars that the world stands on. And hence, as part of his plan of motivating others, he announced, I want to tell you boys, for every act of chesed each one of you has done in the past year, I will give you $1. I want you to remember how valuable every single kind act of chesed is. The students, of course, lit up with excitement. They eagerly began counting on their fingers. What can they remember that they did? They raised their hands. And one kid said, I remember 3 acts of chesed I did, and he goes on to tell them. Another remembered even 10, $10 on the spot. Suddenly, Shmulik, it was Shmulik's turn. He quietly stepped forward, holding up his little notebook. Excuse me, sir, he said. His voice was soft but steady. I've recorded all of my acts of chesed for the past year. The man, the gvir, took the notebook from Shmulik's outstretched hands, flipped through it, and looked back at the boy in awe. Shmulik had recorded 2,555 acts of chesed. Without a moment's hesitation, the guest began counting out the bills, 20, 50, 100, until he got to the total of $2,555. The room, needless to say, fell silent. The other students watched in awe, their eyes wide. The boy they had once felt was a pushover suddenly stood before them as a hero, a champion of chesed. He was the boy who had transformed each of those favors into an invaluable act of kindness. From that moment, the perception of Shmulik changed completely. He was no longer the kid everyone thought they could ask for favors, but rather someone that taught him a lesson that Hashem rewards the ones that do chesed for the right reason. Have a good Shabbos.
This concludes another episode of the Prism of Torah. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something valuable. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and give a 5-star rating. You can also find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts or our own website, prismoftorah.com, where we have a full archive of all our past episodes. We would like to thank Yona Vefa for the recording equipment and Ellie Podcast Productions for handling all our post-podcast productions. Join us next week for another enlightening conversation on the Prism of Torah.